When you already have a child, are you even allowed to complain about wanting another? When you feel so guilty because so many women are still struggling to have their first. If this resonates with you, then today's episode is something you'll want to hear. Secondary infertility comes with so many unexpected challenges, things that were never an issue when you're trying to have your first child. And today we go through all of it. Why this second journey can feel so much harder than the first, and how you can support yourself along the way. Welcome to Your Journey to Fertility. This is the podcast that blends both science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Here each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so you can stop stressing that you'll never have a baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello and welcome back to this episode. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We are speaking about something that is very close to my heart. And, if you followed my journey or listened to me speak about everything I went through to build my family, you'll know that this is something that I struggled with a lot. And, when I talk about secondary infertility, especially on social media, it's probably the topic I get the most amount of pushback from. It's always met with, the barrage of some people are still struggling to have their first, you should be grateful for what you already have, etc. And if you are in the boat of trying to have your second or maybe third child, then I'm sure that you have encountered these kinds of comments as well. But that's just one level of the challenge that comes with this journey. Like it is intense, all of the unexpected things that came up. So today we are talking to my wonderful friend, Allie, who is going to really dive into the complexities of the secondary infertility journey and how you can support yourself if this is where you're at. Allie Karagozian is an occupational therapist with a training in mental health and women's health. She is the founder of Holding Both, which is an organization created to support individuals through secondary infertility and loss. She runs support programs now for women on this journey, and she also has a podcast of her own called the Secondary Infertility Podcast. Like me, Allie experienced both primary and secondary infertility. And in this conversation, we are going to all of the things that come up on this journey, the judgy comments from others, the guilt of wanting more than the child you already have, and the shame of putting so much time and energy into another child when the one you already have wants that time too. Oh, it's a lot, and I just hope you find this conversation helpful. It is one I wish I had heard when I was in the midst of my own journey. So here's Allie. Allie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here. I love everything that you do and the work that you share, and it's just an honor. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was so glad that you asked.
Can we start by learning a little bit about you, Allie? What is your story? What is your journey? And why do you do the work that you do now?
Yeah, so I'm Allie. I live just outside of Chicago with my two young boys and my husband, Michael. We have been together for 15 years, married for 8. And so my story started after we got married. I always knew I wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to be a mom right away after we got married. But my husband and I decided together, mostly on his end, but I am glad that we did, to wait a little bit before we started to try to have children. So we wanted to wait a year so that we could do some things together and travel. And now looking back, I'm really glad that we had that year, because we did come up against infertility when we started trying to conceive. And I'm glad that we had a year without that and without the stress of that. So with my first son, when we were trying to conceive, I went to the fertility specialist a little bit earlier than the 1 year mark that they recommend, because I had irregular cycles. I'm really glad that I did, and I advocated for myself in that regard. But that being said, I was one of the youngest people in the waiting room. I was in my 20s when I did this. So That was interesting because I think if I would have asked around to peers for advice, I would have been told that I don't need to do that. But I'm glad that I listened to myself and advocated for myself and received a diagnosis and went into fertility treatments. And so it took us a while to conceive him. We experienced a loss, and then we went through a series of medicated cycles, a series of IUIs, and the third IUI ended up being my son's pregnancy. So we welcomed him in 2019, at the beginning of 2019. And I think it's really significant too when I look at my two journeys. One of them wasn't during the global pandemic, and one of them was. So I feel like I had a very different experience the second time. But anyways, to get a little bit more back on track, we enjoyed our first year of motherhood or parenthood so much with him. And then when we started to try to conceive our second, we thought we would do the exact same thing, and we thought that it would work the exact same way. And so I went into this second journey truly not anticipating really running up against roadblocks at all. And that was far from the truth for us, both in the trying to conceive phase and in the pregnancy phase, or, during my pregnancy. But we did a series of IUIs, and the last one did result in a pregnancy and a miscarriage. And then so I had a talk with my physician, and we decided to move into IVF. IVF did bring us our son. It was a high-risk pregnancy, though. And once I was on the other side of that, I decided I wanted to do something to give it back. And so that is how Holding Both was born.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I'm so
Of
sorry for your
course.
losses. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
What does this idea of holding both means? It's the name of your business and your presence online. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So to me, Holding Both stands for holding both the joys and challenges of motherhood and the pain and yearning that comes along with infertility at the same time. And so that very much encompasses a lot of the secondary infertility experiences that many of the people that I meet are parents navigating infertility and trying really hard to hold on to the joys that they feel in their everyday life and the challenges that they're experiencing. I don't know if they want to hold on to those, but I do think it's important to acknowledge those too while going through infertility, because it's such a unique experience. I know prior to getting on our interview, you and I had talked about how we both experienced primary and secondary infertility. And I can definitely say that they were much different experiences, even though that a lot of the pain is similar, but there's such a complexity to secondary infertility that I think gets missed. And I think a lot of times gets looked over from people who are on the outside looking in.
Yeah, the complexities is something I'd love to dive into a bit more because it's so unexpected, isn't it? I remember I was going through my first journey of infertility, and I was in my IVF clinic, and I remember sitting there, I was by myself, and this woman came in with a toddler, and I just remember looking at her thinking, what are you doing? Why are you
Yeah,
going
yeah.
through this? You've already got a child. Like, this is horrible. Just you've got your baby. Like, move on with your life. And then fast forward a few years, that was me. I was the one at the IVF clinic that had the toddler. And it doesn't make it any easier. And that's so hard to explain to people who don't have a child, because I certainly didn't get it. So, what
Yeah.
complexities did you find came up with that second journey that just weren't there the first time?
There's so many. But one that I can really think of is when my peers who I met through lactation classes and mom groups, and we got to know each other well when they all started becoming pregnant with their second. I think that was really hard for me because I feel like at that 1 year mark is when people started getting pregnant with their second that I knew. And it was on my mind. And then once we started diving into the fertility journey, it was like, felt like all the time I was at play dates or I was at different things with my son and hearing pregnancies announced. It was hard because I think that when I was going through primary infertility, I could isolate myself from certain events. Or I didn't have any reason to be going to play dates, So I think there's definitely complexity there. And another thing I do want to bring up about the complexities of secondary infertility is that I was focusing on my son and the age gap between him and my hopeful second child, and really fixating on that because I really didn't know when, if, and how my secondary infertility journey would end. And I kept seeing the age gap getting wider. Granted, now I have two, and their age gap isn't as large as some I know, and it isn't the 2 year that I initially wanted, but I always try to remember and remind myself that my story is my story. And in that moment, when I was going through secondary infertility and when I was thinking about the age gap, it was a really, really hard, painful thing to think about.
Mm. Isn't that so true? You plan out your life and what you want it to look
Mm-hmm.
like, and you get married and you think, going to have two kids and they're going to be born this. I was the same. I was going to have two under two. And that was going to be, the mum that I was going to be. And you're right, watching that age gap get wider and wider, and, just knowing those inevitable questions that are going to come up from your child. Why don't I have a sibling? Why does everyone else have a sibling? And that that was really unexpected. And when you are
Mm-hmm.
seeing people around you that are seemingly building their families so easy, it's just so soul destroying, isn't it? And you're right, the
Mm-hmm.
first time around when you're struggling with primary infertility, you might avoid things like baby showers and, pregnancy announcements are really hard. But during secondary infertility, you've already got a child. So, you're going to these events with your child because you've made other friends in that space who are in the same stage of life that you're in. And then all of a sudden you're left behind again.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found that so overwhelming. What did you find were the biggest challenges in this space for you on top of that?
I can think of one specific instance that was one of the hardest things. When I was with my friend, we met each other through a lactation group that I was part of. And our sons were born in the same week. And she was pregnant, and she was about to deliver her baby. And I remember I saw her like a week and a half, 2 weeks before she went to the hospital. But I knew it was going to be like the last time that we were all four together, our two little boys and me and her. Leaving that play date was very hard for me because I just saw her pregnant for the last time. And I knew that like any play date that we would have in the future would be her two boys and me and my son. And it would be like more of a reminder of the stage I was in
Mm-hmm.
versus like the play dates that we had been having. So that ended up being really, really tough. And that's like an instance I can reflect on and think of. And something that's so beautiful about that is after I had my second son, so this was over a year later, she and I went out for dinner, and she was in town. She had ended up moving out of state, and she came back for dinner, or she came back to visit her in-laws. We went out to dinner, and at that time, my son was only like a week or two old, but it felt good to just get out and just be with someone who is so familiar. And she was telling me that she was so proud of me and like how I'm handling new motherhood with my second. And I confided in her that I am so sorry that I wasn't around for you during your newborn stage with your second. And she gave me a huge hug, and she said, "That's not how I remember it. I don't remember like a intense absence of you. That's not how I remember it." And I just felt like that was so special because I was showing up for her in the way that I could. But I also felt like it was a reminder that a lot of the feelings that I had were in my head, and something that I maybe overthought, and that she didn't feel like I was any less of a friend during that time. So I felt like that was really special.
And it's so good to have people like that around you. And I'm not sure what your experience was, but I found that sadly, not everyone was quite as understanding. And I found the feelings of guilt and shame that came up during that second journey. You try to be happy for people and you just can't be. And you're
Hmm.
not there for the special moments, it's too painful to be around them, watching their families grow and to, seemingly watch their family build so easily. Did you find that you came up with these feelings of guilt, and how did that show up in your life?
Yeah, I definitely had feelings of guilt, and I tried to just meet them with self compassion as much as I could because I knew that I was going through a really hard time. I was also during that time working as an essential worker in a hospital during the pandemic. So I think going through simultaneously a lot of difficult things at the same time, I tried to remind myself like you're doing the best you can given the circumstances that you're in, and meeting that guilt with self-compassion as much as I could.
Yeah. That is one of the hardest things to do, isn't it? Just remind
Mhm.
yourself that you are doing enough. And my goodness, going through infertility during the pandemic was a journey on its own. It was just like you. I had my daughter in 2018 before the
Mhm.
pandemic, and then I was going through IVF in 2020, and it was one of the hardest things in the world. And then,
Mhm.
to be throwing all of that on top of secondary infertility as well, it was a lot. And yes.
Yeah, because you're parenting. I don't know how everything was in Australia, but I'm sure similar in some regards for sure. Like parenting kind of in isolation
Mm,
to a certain extent, and then going through infertility, and then for us, it was like I had to. I remember taking all my stims. And then having to take a COVID test, and if it was positive, I would have been not able to have my retrieval. And yeah, it was it was negative, but I couldn't even believe that
no,
because it would have been so much down the drain.
no. And to
So
get to
yeah,
an
it was
egg
just
retrieval on its own is hard enough, to potentially have it all then just taken away from you. Oh,
yeah,
just getting anxiety just thinking back to
I know.
that.
Yeah, but isn't it? It was such a difference to have to welcome a child prior and then like go through infertility after. So you can
Yeah.
definitely relate to
Yeah.
your experience too with
Yes.
that.
You realize how strong you are, and
Mhm.
how things just don't seem that hard these days.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Did you find that a lot of feelings of shame came up around not spending enough time with your son, or not devoting enough time to him, or focusing on wanting more when you should have just been appreciating this lovely little being that you already had?
Definitely. And that is one of the things that comes up a lot in the groups that I hold,
Mm,
because I like to say to the women that I meet, you're not taking anything away from your child by trying to have another, but everybody defines that feeling for themselves. Everybody gets to decide like if they're showing up how they want to be showing up.
mm,
And I remember like just thinking back to that time, I did have some feelings of like, why can't I just be present in this moment? Or
mm,
why can't I just be happy with things that the way they are, and then maybe in a little while I can seek out fertility treatment. But something kept pushing me towards wanting to try when I wanted to try. And so again, that's where the self-compassion piece kind of came back into it. Easier said than done a lot of the times though, because there were times where I would have to I'd be home with him on a day that I wasn't working, and I'd have to take a phone call from like the pharmacy or the insurance company or the nurse. And I hated to take time away from him to like pick up that phone and talk. And some of those phone calls can be so lengthy. So yeah, I just those moments kind of stand out to me.
mm. That really resonates with me as well. And in the groups that you run and the support work that you do with your clients, what kind of tools do you offer them or try to work through with them when they are coming up against those feelings of guilt or shame about wanting more than the child they already have?
Mhm. Well, with that, a lot of times when we're talking about that, I like to make it an open discussion where instead of me providing specific tools, I open it up to the women in the group, which typically there's 4 or 5 women in addition to me, talking about how they've been navigating it. So they all kind of guide the conversation and give ideas to each other, which has been really great. And we talk about the different supports that they have and the different ways that they can help their child feel like that nothing is being taken away from them during this time. So obviously varies from age to age. So that's something too that we talk about is do you how much have you told your child, if anything, about your journey in an age appropriate way? Or is this something that you're not talking to your child about, and that kind of thing? So that's always so interesting because everybody's taking it from a different angle.
Mm.
And I feel like a lot of them learn a lot from each other.
Mm. One of the hardest things that I found on this journey, whilst, it's hard in itself, and we had the pandemic, but it was the attitude from others when I opened up about it. And,
Mm-hmm.
there were, of course, hopefully, like me, everyone has some people in their lives that get it and that are supportive, but gosh, like family, friends, colleagues, even doctors. I
Mm-hmm.
remember after I had my miscarriage when I was trying for my second, my doctor said to me 4 weeks after I'd lost my baby, she's like, "Why are you still upset about this? You can just try again. And if it doesn't
Oh
happen, you've already got a
my
child."
gosh.
I know. And found a different doctor after that. But
Yeah, yeah.
how how do you even start to navigate some of these things when you're coming up against comments? Do you find that that's something that the women you work with mention a lot?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes the overarching general consensus is depends on who asks the question or depends on who makes the statement. If you want to respond in any type of way, for me personally, I did get some of those comments for sure. Coming from people who are well meaning, not, I could tell that they were trying to fix it and say, well, look at this amazing son that you have. That should be enough. Like, why are you sad? There's worse things. I've heard a lot. Almost heard it all, I think. And I feel like when those statements are made, they're really invalidating, because if someone wasn't coming up against infertility, no one would ask them why they were trying to have a second child or why they were going to have a third child or a fourth child or whatever. And so yeah, I mean, with those comments, I think that the answers that I gave or the answers that I hear other people say that they give really depend on the context in the relationship.
Mm. Do you find that there are women that you meet who, maybe their partners were on board about trying for a second child, and as time has gone on, their partners become less and less on board because it is getting so hard and it's taking away from their relationship and their family?
Yeah, I've actually heard both sides. Like I've heard people say that, like you said, the partner comes to a point where their endpoint is sooner than the person who's going to be carrying. But then I've also heard it from the other side. A friend of mine had a son at home, and then she ended up going through secondary infertility and having four miscarriages. And after that fourth miscarriage, is where she drew that line in the sand of like, that's it. Like there's no more trying.
Mm.
Um, but I feel the male partner, that they are ready to stop trying before the female partner in heterosexual relationships. That's where I mostly hear, because I feel like, speaking for myself, we never got to the point where we were debating stopping. But speaking for myself, I think I would have just kept going and going and going because I feel like with IVF, and when you're the person doing it, at least for me, I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. Like, just block everything else out and just focus on like one day at a time, one step at a time. And with that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I felt like I could just keep going and going and going, which obviously is not the healthiest thing. Like, I feel like sometimes if you need to take a break, you need to take a break. But I think, like for my husband, it was hard for him to watch me go through what I went through with the different fertility treatments. So I could see if we got further along the line than we did, I could see him maybe saying, okay, that's enough, or like, I
Mhm.
think that I want to be done. So I always think it's such a like important thing to have an ongoing conversation with your partner.
Mm. Is there anything else that you offer for your clients to consider if that's the case? Other ways that you can work with your partner, and how can you continue to be on the same page in this kind of a situation?
Yeah, so I actually do have a group that's specific to people who are deciding to end their secondary infertility journeys, and embrace their motherhood in a way that's a little bit different than they might have initially expected or initially planned. And so a lot of the conversation with that in that group unfolds in that way of like talking to your partner, making sure that you are on the same page about being done. And I think one of the main things that I suggest is for your partner to have someone to talk to outside of your relationship, because I feel like a lot of the times the male partners get missed. I feel like females would, we have a lot of people that we talk with, or whether we're on Instagram, connecting in these awesome communities that so many of us have built. And I don't want to generalize too, but I feel like on the whole, I hear that more like in the male relation, or the male in the relationship has less outside support a lot of the time. So I always encourage the women in my group to make sure that their partners are getting the support that they need outside of the relationship. And I know that there's not an overwhelming amount of male support groups, but I do know Resolve has one. And so I like to point people in that direction if their male partner is looking for something, for some
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, I think it is a very fair generalization. And
Yeah.
certainly, and it's so unfair as well because it has a huge impact. And I know that my husband ended up taking a lot of the responsibility of my daughter when I was struggling, and, when I lost a baby and I couldn't get out of bed, it was all on him. And so
Yeah.
to be able to offer support for your partner or your husband is so, so important as well. So
Oh, for sure.
raising that. How do you recommend that we deal with these insensitive comments when we come up against them? Whether it is a colleague or a flippant comment or something that your doctor says, what's the best way to support yourself in those kind of situations?
I think the best way to support yourself is just pausing for a second and deciding how you want to respond and if you want to respond. And
You're so zen, Allie. I love this. I'm just picturing myself
oh, thank
in the
you.
moment trying to pause rather than say something nasty in the moment. But
Yeah,
no,
I do have an example, and it's not of an infertility example, but it kind of is. And I didn't say something, and now, like in retrospect, I kind of wish I would have, because I feel like it could have been a really good, maybe learning opportunity for this woman. But like I said, it wasn't a comment about secondary infertility, but I was at a wedding a couple months ago, and well, yeah, earlier this year. And this woman who was sitting at the table congratulated me on being pregnant, and I'm not pregnant. And she said, I normally don't ask people this, but I'm pretty confident because you're all belly. So congratulations. Like, when are you due? And to me, I couldn't say anything other than like, I'm not pregnant. My husband actually said something after I went to the bathroom because I needed to excuse myself. After I said, I'm not pregnant, she's like, You're not? Did you have a baby recently? Which I also have not.
oh, just keep
And
digging a hole here, lady.
I know. And the woman said, she apologized, and she said that she's been trying and has had multiple losses. And
Mm,
to me, that doesn't give anybody a free pass to make a comment about someone else's body.
mm,
But I really did, like, in retrospect, I would have loved to have said something.
mm,
And I think about that with fertility comments, is that like sometimes someone, a comment is made to someone, it takes them so off guard that they just don't even know what to say. And that's how I felt in that moment, because that was completely inappropriate. But I also think that, like, if you're in a situation where someone asks you a question or someone makes a statement about secondary infertility that's completely insensitive, I think the most important thing, like I said, was to just take a pause and decide if and how you want to respond.
mm,
And if you feel like it could really be, like, if you feel like you're in the place for it, and if you feel like you can respond in a way that will maybe prevent that person from ever asking someone a question like that again.
Mm.
I think that's an amazing opportunity. But like I said, I know that's not always like the way that you want to approach it in the moment. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does, because it's so subjective, isn't it? I would love
Mhm.
to be able to say that every time someone said something insensitive to me, I was able to very articulately respond to them in a way that made them never repeat that kind of question. But that's not true. And I did,
Yeah, yeah.
as my journey went on, I think I got more confident with being open with my journey.
Hmm.
And I think that people were a bit more respectful the more open I was. But
Hmm.
look, I can't say I got it right all of the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's just interesting too, because that is something that comes up in my groups and that I've talked to people about is the like varying degrees to which people are open about their journeys.
Mm.
And I know everybody has different preferences, but I remember one specific instance, someone had said like, "Oh yeah, I tell anybody." Because like if someone is going to ask me, I'm going to just say like when IVF works, that's when I would have another kid,
Yeah.
or like just straight, like give it, and I really appreciate people like that because I
Yeah.
think that that helps a lot of, hopefully helps those comments stop at that, stops the people that are asking those comments dead in their tracks and maybe have them think twice before they do it again.
Almost got to a point where it was fun to see people's reaction when you got so open.
Yeah, yeah,
But you're right, it isn't always possible. And if you don't want to be open about your journey, then that's absolutely fine. And, I work in this space, as do you. So I
yeah,
assume that people's attitudes are changing. But then every now and then something happens, like, a video I post will go viral. So it will be shown to a lot more people that don't normally see my content. And then the comments that you get about infertility and pregnancy loss, and it blows my mind. So there is a lot of work to be done. So
yeah.
my advice is
I
this.
haven't had that experience yet, knock on wood. I feel like I've never had anything go like super viral, but I do like on some of the videos that I've made about secondary fertility, I do get a handful of comments like, well, at least you have one, or like, at least, I
All
get
those,
those.
all those lovely words.
Uh,
Yeah.
Sometimes I delete them, sometimes I respond. It just kind of depends on the feeling that I'm having. I normally don't delete the ones that say like at least you have one. Like I think that's a good opportunity for me to write back and
Mm.
say this is why holding both exists, basically, or to really be gentle about it but firm too. So
Yeah. Oh, I have a bit of a heavy question to ask you
sure,
around dealing with loss when you already have a child, which is something you are familiar with. And I know in my experience, my world just fell in. I hadn't had a loss when I was trying to conceive my first child. So when I did, I couldn't be a parent. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't go to work. How do you how would you help? How do I even explain this question? I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. What advice do you give to people that are in that situation where the shame and the crushing guilt that comes with not being able to even parent your child because you want another one is there?
yeah, gosh, it is so tough. And I guess to back up a little bit too is that like I had a miscarriage before I was a mom, or before I had my son, and then I had a miscarriage after. And I remember thinking the first time, like, oh, if I had a baby at home, I wouldn't be this sad. I wouldn't be this,
Mm.
you know, and it like was not the case. I mean, it was hard. It was a completely different type of heartbreak. And I'm not gonna say it was any easier that I had a child at home. Like in fact, it had the added complexity, like you were saying, of parenting after a loss. And that was really hard. And I think the best advice that I would give someone is if you have a partner, to lean on your partner, like lean on them, tell them exactly what you need. Um, if if anybody else in your life knows about it, lean on them too. Don't be afraid to ask for help and go easy on yourself. Like if you need to do something that maybe isn't something that you normally do, like for me, it was turning on the TV a little bit more for my son and putting on Bluey. Actually, it probably wasn't Bluey. No, because I don't. When did Bluey come out? My kids like Bluey, but I don't think it was Bluey though.
It was a while back, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe it
Far back
was.
though.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, not judging yourself on your parenting at that time, because I felt like, I was doing the best I could. I was showing up the best I could. I was keeping him safe. I was keeping him fed. I was doing everything that I could to be present. But at the same time, I wasn't like looking back on that period. And especially in the first week or so, I wasn't parenting or mothering in the way that like I normally do. And that is okay. And that is understandable.
Good advice.
So yeah.
Thank you. That is a really hard one. And I remember thinking the same, I shouldn't be so upset about this because I have a child. Why is this so hard? Oh, I was so hard on myself. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important thing to say. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. It is just such a hard thing because it's like you're literally holding both. Like you're holding your child and you're miscarrying. I mean, it's like at the same time. I remember my miscarriage started at work and I had to go pick my son up from daycare. And it was one of those things where I just was like sitting in my car crying in the daycare parking lot and then being like, okay, like I'm going to go in and pick him up and like, this is going to be hard, but it's also maybe going to bring me a little bit of solace to see him. And I'll never forget like walking out of daycare and like the sun was setting and it was so beautiful and I was holding him and I felt so grateful and so sad. And it's just like that's holding both to me.
Yes, it is. And it's possible for both to be absolutely present at the same time. And I just love what you said, go easy on your ability to parent at that stage. I think as well, give yourself some grace and know that doesn't change the amount of love that you have for your child in any way.
Not at all. If anything, you're caring for yourself in a way that you can show up better.
Yeah, definitely. Allie, is there anything that we've missed? Is there anything else that you think people who are in this position need to know or any other advice that you want to give them?
Yeah, I often think about like where I'm at in my holding both journey right now. I have 2 kids and I think about how secondary infertility was so impactful for me. It was such a challenging time. And I think very similar to primary infertility when you have your second child, I think people think it's over. But I really do think that it is going to be like a lifelong healing for me because I feel like I think back on the period of trying to conceive and parent during a pandemic, as we were talking about, it's just such a traumatic time. It was such a difficult time. And I think it's going to be a lifelong healing. And I think I'm healing from that different than I'm healing from primary infertility. I think, both of those experiences, like I will carry them throughout my life, but I'll carry them like they've gotten a lot lighter. Lights might not be the word. It's gotten a lot easier to carry and a lot more straightforward. But I think my message is that these experiences, for better or for worse, will be with us forever. And I think that that's not necessarily the worst thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that there's a lot of empathy and I think that there's a lot of value that we have learned and been able to internalize that will also carry with us too.
That is such an important message. I completely agree. I got to the point where I did a lot of work before I conceived my son and I had a very difficult pregnancy. And, I thought, well, I'm pregnant now. And then when he was born, I'm like, well, he's fine. I've done the work. I'm healed. I'm good to go. Nothing could have been further from the truth. So it has been a years-long process of processing all of the trauma that you go through when, you are dealing with things like loss and repeated treatments that aren't working and everything that goes along with that. That is a really important thing to point out, Allie. Thank you. That it isn't something that you're going to heal from in a short amount of time. It is an ongoing thing. But Absolutely. You're right. It isn't a bad thing either. I think that it makes you Certainly for me, it's made my life richer. It's made me more compassionate. It's made me more patient. Um, my husband might disagree, but definitely, I think if you can get through some of these things, the rest of your life just opens up and feels so much easier and so much richer. So thank you for
Yeah, I
sharing.
agree.
Mm. Ali, where can people find you and learn more about holding both and everything that you offer the world?
Yeah, so I am mostly on Instagram. So I am at holding both, no period, no underscore. So it's at HOLDINGBOTH. And then my website is www.holdingbothllc.com. And there is a spot on my website where you can contact me or email me, and I will respond within 24 to 48 hours.
Amazing. Ali, thank you so much for today and for all that you do. You are just a joy to have here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode with Ali. And I hope that you got a lot out of that. And if you are on your own journey of secondary infertility, I really hope that some of the things that we spoke about today were helpful. I know for sure that, if I'd had more people speaking about secondary infertility when I was going through it, I would have felt a lot less alone. So if you find that that is the case, please feel free to share this episode. You never know who might be experiencing the same struggles, and it is just always wonderful to provide as many resources as we can. Now, on the next episode of the podcast, we are going to be speaking about listening to your intuition and why this is so important when you're trying to conceive. We're going to get a little bit woo. We go a bit into the spiritual side of things here. So I think you're really going to enjoy this and get a lot out of it. So I will see you back here next week. Until then, I am sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.